Good night and welcome to another edition of In Touch. I know many of you have been waiting impatiently for tonight's discussion. You had a preview of what we'll be discussing tonight on Facebook, and there has been a lot of discussion and so many suggestions coming out of an activity that was held this morning at the office of the Prime Minister. This morning, the Ministry of Agriculture led the way in presenting a transformation of the school feeding program, and we also had the launch of the Zero Hunger Challenge. I know that just the term zero hunger causes many of us to think, many of us to brainstorm and to reflect on what is happening in St. Lucia right now. A few years ago, there was an assessment done which revealed that there are many St. Lucians living below the poverty line. We know that poverty would affect our children in different ways. It affects their education, it affects their abilities to socialize, and so a program like the school feeding program would play a very key role in ensuring that our students, our children are able to go to school, are able to get a meal and to participate in their classes and regular activities just as any other child. The school feeding program has been underway for some time now, but there is a very exciting development. The Ministry of Agriculture, along with partners, has embarked on a project to cause our schools to become more involved, to cause our community through the farmers to become more involved, to cause the private sector to become more involved. And I think the most exciting part of all of this is that our local produce would feature. And so tonight, I welcome to the program Ms. Sunita Daniel. She's the Chief Agricultural Officer, Chief Agricultural and Planning Officer in the Ministry of Agriculture. Always a pleasure to talk to her, my former teacher. Good night and welcome to In Touch.
Good night. Thank you, Jada. I'm happy to be here.
There's a lot we can discuss, and as I indicated earlier, the discussion has been ongoing. Earlier this morning, we had this ceremony at the office of the Prime Minister, and I must say it was refreshing to see that collaboration. We had not just government ministries coming together, but we also had the schools involved. We also had, importantly, the private sector involved in such a wonderful initiative. Tell us a little bit more about the changes happening right now in the school feeding program and what we expect to get out of what was presented this morning.
Well, what we have is a different slant towards school feeding. Normally, the school feeding program is within the remit of the Ministry of Education.
Yes.
And we've realized that to leave such an important element of government work to just one agency, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. And so it was very refreshing for us to learn that the ministers have agreed to come together. And so this is where you would find, as you saw this morning, all the ministers were present, which shows a lot of political support for this initiative. And so we have the Ministries of Agriculture, the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Social Transformation, all coming together. And I don't think that we have seen this very often in the past. And we've been working very well together to address the issues of school feeding.
Where did the inspiration or the desire come from to change the school feeding program? The school feeding program has existed for a number of years, and we have a number of schools, mostly primary schools on that program, where students who come from poor or indigent families are asked to bring in $1 a day and they would receive a meal for lunch. For some, it has worked well, and you have had a program that has been running smoothly for so many years. Why the change?
Because we looked at the school feeding program, and it was really the Minister of Agriculture who has been speaking for a little while now about his own willingness to have more food, more locally grown food on the plate that children eat. And so we engaged the Ministry of Education, and we all willingly accepted that when you look at a plate that the children consume, it's a lot of imported foods and a lot of processed foods. And so the vision really came from the Minister of Agriculture to say, how can we work together to address that issue? And so he and the Minister of Education came together, and these two have a very good working relationship, and so they have agreed that we need to look at the school feeding program to see how we can include a lot more local foods on the plate and more nutritious foods on the plate that the children consume.
So the special program that was launched today featured some schools, and we saw some new components of that program. one which featured highly was the incorporation of the school garden into the school feeding program. Now, currently there are some schools who have the school garden. It is used as practicals for students doing agriculture and so on, but not it is not directly linked or tied into the kitchen in that it is an endeavor that would feed the kitchen, that would produce the meals for our children. How will we incorporate that aspect into the program, and what are the plans to ensure that it is sustainable, that the schools will be provided with the equipment that is needed, with the technical expertise that would be needed so that they can plow, have that garden, plant, and to have food to supply the kitchens?
To have a sustainable school feeding program, you must have a garden at that school, and that is a critical element of any school feeding program. And so the Ministry of Agriculture, through the extension officers, will be working along with those schools, and they have already started working along with those schools to begin the development of school gardens. In some of them, as you rightly said, there are some school gardens. They're very limited in scope, for example, and we would like to widen the range of what is grown in those gardens. And in some other schools, there was no school garden. So what you found was that central government would have sent a lot of the food that had to be consumed down to, for example, Viewfort or Choiseul for the term or for the month, and they would use that. And so in those schools...
But what really can central government supply? I mean, when you say
like
central
flour.
government, I think of rice and flour,
right?
Which
so
is what
flour
would be coming from the warehouse.
Yes, so you have a lot of stuff from the warehouse, rice and flour, for example, which was what really caught our attention, that we had to address that issue. And so in the sustainable school feeding, the food will be right there in the backyard of the school. And so we have gone through what we need to get done, and so the extension officers have targeted a lot of the schools what they should be growing. An important element is also the integration of farmers into that program. So you'd see a lot more community farmers supplying the school garden with what they couldn't grow, for example. So that's basically what you would see in that program.
The schools, many persons are anxious to know which schools are part of the pilot program and what level of support will be given to the schools. As we speak, not all of the schools on island have a feeding program, and even with the new program and the pilot program to have a more holistic school feeding program, not all of the schools will be touched. So can you give us a list of the schools that we are working with now? And I am sure many persons will be asking, what next?
Right.
When do we go to the next step? When do we include the other schools on the program?
So we have a pilot project, and so that limited the number of schools that we could have on this project. However, we have looked at, and we know that the need exists, and we have had a lot of calls from many principals saying, why is my school not included in this project? I want my school in this project. And next year we are looking to expand that, but very gradually. And so I'd just like to go through the schools that we have selected. They are the Grosile Primary School, the Moshi Primary School, the Grand Riviere Combined School, the Foasso Combined School, the Carmen Rene Memorial School, La Quamingo Primary School, Ancillary Primary, Soufre Primary, Itangs Combined, Morgouge Primary, Pero Combined, Viewfort Primary, and Richfort Combined. So those schools have been selected in this first phase of the project.
How were the schools selected? Because I know many persons will be wondering. The school feeding program usually caters to those who are unable to provide. So I'm supposing, and I hope that I'm right, that we're looking at areas where there is that deficiency, there is limitation, and there is a need to build capacity. You
correct partially. We came up with the criteria that all of the schools had to meet. And remember, we are trying to do a sustainable school feeding program. And to have a sustainable program, there are certain elements which must be present. Like I said earlier, the garden. And so there should be space for a garden. And even when there's not enough space, we could use tires. We could use other mechanisms. But we looked at the ability to have a garden, the ability of them to have a proper functioning kitchen. This is critical. And as you said, the level of need of students in those schools. So we went through the criteria. We looked at a long, extensive list of schools. And so the committee had a very difficult task to cut it down to 13, which we have done. But we realized that there are a lot of other schools which need to be targeted. But based on the level of need in those schools, but also the ability to really, and also the commitment of principals presently. Because like you said, to have a sustainable school feeding program, we need to have a garden. And who would take care of the gardens on weekends or when school closes? And so those principals have basically given a commitment that it will be their responsibility. They will put mechanisms in place to ensure that those gardens are tended. So these are the reasons why those schools have been selected initially.
But I can tell you, some of the schools right now who have gardens and you know, have feeding programs, I know that usually what would happen is that the caretaker, the school caretaker on weekends would, you know, water the gardens and ensure that everything is in place. But under the pilot program, what level of support is being given to the respective schools? What will they get? Is it only technical guidance, or are you actually providing them with the inputs that are necessary to start off the farms?
Okay, what they're getting is based on their need. All of them have specific needs. Some of them have very strong areas, which we will strengthen, but we are really addressing weaknesses in those schools. And so some schools would not have a proper kitchen. We actually have some schools which need quite a bit of refurbishment. We have gone to certain schools where it's really difficult to stay in the kitchen because it gets so hot. And so we are going to be looking at refurbishing those kitchens. The other kind of support they'll be getting is in setting up their gardens. A lot of the schools can do it. A garden is very costly. It can be very costly. And we are looking at doing the best type of agriculture. And so that takes a bit of money. So that's some of the inputs that they'll be getting under the project, aside from technical assistance. And we are going to be given cooks training. We are going to be training the teachers. We are also going to be assisting them in health habits, healthy eating, and training the teachers and training the students. And so this pilot project is really integrative and really holistic in how we are going to approach school feeding.
I know many persons will ask, what will happen to the canteens? There are some schools where you have canteens existing. And if we are to be honest, in our whole discussion, we know that some of the foods that are being sold at these canteens, they will not be the first choice, what we want our children to have as a snack or for lunch. But because it is readily available, they are inclined to purchase it. So this program can be clashing or competing head-to-head with the canteen. Where canteens exist on the school compound, Viewford Primary is an example, how do we manage the dynamics here?
Well, this is a very good point, because the committee has actually met and we've realized that this could be a potential problem, because here you are feeding the children all these great nutritious foods, but then they have the option for snacks which are not absolutely healthy. There's not a lot that we can do about it. The best we could do is educate persons at the canteens. The Ministry of Health has agreed to go out and do a lot of educating and looking at what is sold in those canteens and what replacements. For example, you have sodas, and I know a lot of schools have actually stopped selling sodas on school compounds, but where it exists, you have alternatives. We have the fruit juices, for example, which are produced at the Foaso processing plant. We have had engagement with the Foaso processing plant, which is incidentally run by the Ministry of Agriculture, as to how these children can replace sodas with local juices. So we're talking about fruitsicles, pulping of natural juices that we'll send to the schools. So that actually takes away the soda component. So it's really a process of education, because it's not something you can go, it's also somebody's livelihood, the person who owns a canteen. All we could do is really get the buy-in and educate them as to how their efforts, what they're doing really works against our own efforts.
You spoke a little while ago to the training of chefs. There was a very interesting discussion in SLAP this afternoon where the information was posted about what happened this morning. And many of the members were brainstorming as to what we can do, how we can approach this. And a very good point was made by one of the contributors that the food, while it is good, and we understand the nutritional value, it is difficult to get our students to appreciate it because of how it is prepared. what can be done to make the food more attractive?
Right.
More attractive to the eyes first, and then of course to our palates. One individual suggested that there is training, not just random training, but we actually bring in recognized and top chefs in St. Lucia who prepare local foods at the hotels and so on to come in, so that they can train our cooks at the schools, so that we can have a better looking and better tasting platter.
We have engaged the nutritionists at the Ministry of Health, and they have actually agreed to look at the menus at those schools and to look at how they could prepare and give the cooks better recipes. Recipes, for example, we know that children don't really like to eat spinach, and so you could actually put spinach in a lot of things and children wouldn't really know that they're eating spinach, although we'd like them to know I'm eating spinach and that is better for me.
But you're not at that age, you can't do the truck and all of that. You're at school, you have an hour for lunch, you need to get through it and get back to class.
And so the nutritionists will be looking at the menus and developing recipes, and we'll train the cooks as to how these recipes can be prepared. We have also engaged and have started discussing with some chefs. So for example, Chef Orlando has agreed to come on board with us in this project to look at how you could prepare better tasting meals for the children. So that's one of the areas we have actually addressed.
Great. Now, at what point would the schools know or decide which crops they would be planting and what would be needed to feed the kitchen? We have a problem, and I say it a problem as a consumer, where there is one moment where there is an overload of something on the market, like tomatoes and so on, and I know it is not a farmer's fault that we're dealing with weather patterns and so many other issues that would affect our production. But one moment you have too many cucumbers, the next moment you can't make a proper burger because there's a shortage of cucumbers. And then, you know, and we know that our fruits are available in cycles and so on. How would the schools know, and what kind of guidance would be given to them as to what they should plant, what they should not plant, what would be too expensive to maintain, what would be better to get from your local farmer and so on?
That's why the importance of the collaboration among the ministries is so critical, because what you have now is the extension officers, who are really the agricultural extension officers on the ground, know what farmers currently produce. They know when fruits and vegetables are in season or not. And so they are working with us, and they are represented on our committee to tell the schools what should be, not tell, but really work with the schools as to what should be planted and so on. And so the Ministry of Education is aware of that. And so we are communicating. We know what's on the ground. We know when Ministry of Health prepares the recipes. So for this period, these fruits are in season. This is what you should consume. So we are all talking. And I think that's what was absent before, this communication, that people didn't know what was happening. And now we're speaking to each other. We know a lot of what's happening now.
I'm sure there has been challenges in selling this idea. We have a lot. We have fruits and so on. Even outside of this program, I do not know what would stop a school, for example, a primary or secondary school within a particular community where there is an abundance of mangoes or an abundance of guavas, for example, and having that fruit a day or at least one fruit featured a week. And these kinds of, you know, initiatives that you would hope would come even outside of a directive or project and program from the Ministry of Agriculture. Are there any schools right now that you can cite as good examples in how they manage their school feeding programs?
There is not a school right now that has what we call a sustainable school feeding. So this is why this project is so critical for us in St. Lucia. We actually had a baseline conducted, and we saw a lot of the areas which we had to address.
So there are a lot of gaps.
Yeah. There's one school, though, the OJ Combined School, for example, who has a very good garden, and they have learned how to plant, how to integrate those vegetables into their own foods and the excess that they sell. but there are still other gaps in terms of how much of everything that they have. They don't have everything. They only have very limited amounts of the vegetables, for example.
Understood. We do for our first commercial break. When we come back, we will zero in on the Zero Hunger Challenge, and of course, you will get an opportunity to call to ask your questions or to add to the discussion as well. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after the commercial break. Welcome back, and thank you for staying in touch. We're speaking with Ms. Sunita Daniel, who is the Chief Agricultural Planning Officer in the Ministry of Agriculture. We have been focusing on the school feeding program, a transformed school feeding program to incorporate our local produce and to ensure that we are providing our children with a more nutritious meal. We spoke a little bit about the program, the schools that will benefit from the program, but there are partners and external partners. By external, I mean partners outside of the government of St. Lucia, who have contributed to ensure that this project is a success. We saw the likes of Lucilec, we also saw First Citizens, National Lotteries Authority this morning speaking and presenting, but I know that there are other sponsors as well who were not present this morning or were not part of the ceremony, but their contribution is very significant. Tell us a little bit about the collaboration, and was it an easy task to get the private sector to buy into something that would not necessarily bring immediate financial returns?
Okay, we looked at, when the committee met, we looked at our situation, and we know that the government has a few fiscal restrictions, but we also realized that we needed extra funding to really get this project to be successful. And so we decided, why don't we target the private sector and see if they'll come on board. It doesn't hurt. Yes, it wouldn't hurt. And so we wrote some letters and sent them out to them. And Jadia, we were shocked at the response of the private sector. I wasn't even calling people, and people were calling me and saying, wow, can I talk to you about this letter that you sent me? And I'm really interested in joining the school feeding program. And so I'd like to take this opportunity to really thank the private sector, because they do get a lot of flack a lot of the time, but this time they have really come on board with us. And I'd just like to mention a few of them so far. Like you said, we have Lucilec on board. We have Carib Seeds, and Carib Seeds has given us all of the seeds we need for all of the gardens in this project. And that is a huge contribution from a business whose business is seeds, really. And so we're really thankful. We have Weezo, who will be assisting us with the greenhouses and also setting up irrigation systems at the schools. So some of the schools will have up-to-date, very new technology in terms of irrigation systems. We have First Citizens Investment Services, and they were one of the first persons to really come on board, and they'll be assisting us with the Rich Fond Combined School. Beachcomber Limited, we were very pleased to hear from them. Yes, Beachcomber also came on board with us. We also have FIX, Financial Investment and Consultancy Services Limited, the St. Lucia National Lotteries, and very recently SMJ Beverages have also come on board, also promising a very substantial amount to this project. So it was not difficult at all to get the private sector. We do have a lot of other needs, and so it's not like we have reached our quota. All of the private sector is invited to really come on board on this school feeding program, because we have realized that disadvantaged children and underprivileged children is the responsibility of our society. We cannot expect that government will take care of these things alone. It has to be a collective, because it will impact all of us eventually.
Do we have external partners? Or is it simply the government of St. Lucia and private sector? Actually,
we do have a very important external partner in the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. They have helped us tremendously. Actually, they were the ones who brought us onto this project. And we're very lucky, because there was a mad rush to get onto this project within the Caribbean. And so Jamaica and Antigua were already on the project, and it was closed because it was Latin America and Jamaica and Antigua. And St. Lucia really lobbied hard to say we need to get onto this project. And Dr. Ford from the FAO office in Barbados was really nice and said, okay, we'll put you onto this project. And we were quite happy for that. So FAO is also assisting us in this project, but also the government of Brazil. And the government of Brazil, we are quite happy to work with, because the government of Brazil, or Brazil, has what we all recognized as what is the best school feeding in the world. And so we have actually gone to Brazil to see how their project is run, how their school feeding is run, and that's what we'll be replicating in St. Lucia in those schools. And it is very impressive. And so they have already sent 2 missions to St. Lucia in May and June, and another mission is coming in December. And right now there's a course that the government of Brazil is sponsoring where we're training technical officers throughout the government service as to what really is a sustainable school feeding program.
Now, there are some persons who are not yet convinced that we actually have the train in motion. And don't blame them, because sometimes in government you have a launching of something, then you have a sword turning ceremony for something, and then so you have a number of talk shops before you actually see things happening on the ground. Where are we right now with this program? Are the wheels in motion? Are the schools already benefiting? Do we have schools that have received greenhouses or the seedlings? Lands being plowed as yet, or are we still at the stage where we are expressing a vision?
The difference with this project is that we have done so much work before we launched. So it's almost like, okay, a lot of stuff has happened and now we're launching, and I think that's actually the best way to go about doing it. And so, for example, you'd find at Grosley Primary that land preparation has already taken place. I have seen myself, I have gone to the school and I've seen that plowing has started. We still have a bit of drainage work to do there. The Moshi Primary School planting has started there. Grand Riviere Combined activities have commenced in the garden. For Assau Combined, the greenhouse is complete, and we have already targeted the crops for that greenhouse. The Carmen Rene Memorial, their garden is complete. It has been fenced, and we are now going to be planting cucumbers and tomatoes. So you see, we already know what we're doing there.
Yes.
The Lacqua Primary, we have asked that NICE undertake some of the land preparation. The tires have been procured for that school, and the manure has been procured. So we're moving on in that area. Ancillary Primary will be working with ICA on that project in terms of the Hoops project. And so this is another agency which we're working closely with. Sufre Primary planting has commenced. Etangs Combined, one of our private sector, WIZO, would be putting in the irrigation system there, and they are actually donating the irrigation system for that school. And land preparation has also commenced there. Morgus Primary, we have already started clearing up, and Pero Combined, we know that the kitchen needs to be refurbished, and so we have already engaged a contractor to do that kitchen at Pero Combined. Viewford Primary.
I was wondering when would we get there?
How can we leave Viewford for last?
I was wondering, because it must be the best.
Exactly. So we'll come back to Viewford Primary.
Sure.
We'll go to Richford Combined. We know that the kitchen needs to be expanded, and I think the people at Richford Primary have been working really hard on some really stringent conditions, and we're very happy to now assist them with the expansion of that garden, of the kitchen. A new garden will also be commenced there, and a greenhouse will be installed, and we saw the money being received today for Citizens Investment will be funding that. Excellent. And we get to Viewford Primary.
Yes.
Now Viewford Primary is very special.
Thank you.
For many reasons.
Well, it's the Prime Minister's constituency,
yes.
And we know that there are some very special needs. If you go back to the poverty assessment report, if you go into the community, certain sections of the community, then you understand what is happening there. I was very surprised that there was no school feeding program there.
Yes, there is actually no school. I was also surprised when we did the assessments and we said, so where are you? Mr. Mooney, who's the principal, was like, I've been begging for a school feeding program here because we really need it. And you'd realize that Viewford Primary services a very special set of people. And so Viewford Primary will be getting the gold standard. And today my PS said to me, it's not the gold standard you're giving Viewford Primary. They're actually getting the platinum standard.
Wow.
And so they're going to have a new kitchen constructed. There is an old kitchen, but it needs quite a bit of work, and so that will take place. I have seen the drawings myself for that kitchen, so we are moving speedily on that. A new garden will be constructed because they don't have a garden at all, and so they will also get greenhouses, which is closer to the Philip Masley grounds around that area. And so Viewford Primary is coming in last, but coming in great, pretty much, with everything that they need for sustainable school feeding.
A little while ago, you mentioned one of the schools, the gardens, and you said that the fencing has already happened. And this was one of the things on my mind, security.
Right.
It is a reality that people steal agricultural produce. I think our farmers have been crying about that, complaining about that. And even some of the schools that have undertaken their gardens on their own, they have complained that one of the limitations is that they are not able to secure what they actually sow. And for the children, it can be a bit disheartening if they invest so much of their time to care for their garden, and then when they come in one morning, they realize that all of their crops are gone. Is any consideration being given to security?
It's actually a big problem for us. A lot of the schools have complained about, I mean, you go into the gardens, the children actually take part in planting, and then when you come, when it's time to reap, and there's nothing.
Yeah.
Somebody from the community or something has already gone away with that, and we call that predia larceny. And so the schools are not exempt from it. They actually suffer from it themselves. One of those areas would be in Soufre, and so we'll be fencing the Soufre garden. There is a bit of fencing, but that will be expanded, and that will be done with the assistance of SMG Beverages. So we are really looking at that. Incidentally, Viffort Primary, we are also saying that we should look at the installation of cameras around the school. That's one of the ways of really looking at predia larceny. So these are the issues. It is an issue for us. We know, and it's a worry for us, but we are trying to put things in place to ensure that that's minimized as much as possible.
The Zero Hunger Challenge, it was launched today alongside the new school feeding program. What are the objectives of this program? It sounds really good, Zero Hunger Challenge, but how do we achieve that? What are some of the pillars that we have already established to ensure that we work assiduously towards minimizing or eradicating hunger in our population?
So we're in a world where challenges seem to abound, but this Zero Hunger Challenge was actually there quite a while now. And the Zero Hunger Challenge is one actually set out by the United Nations Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon, who wants all of us to put particular emphasis on decreasing hunger and poverty in our countries. And we all know that we have pockets of persons who are hungry, who are poor, and our emphasis under the Zero Hunger Project would be looking at them. For St. Lucia, we are part of the Caribbean, and the Caribbean is very particular, apart from Latin America and the Latin American countries, where in Latin America they really look at zero hunger. For the Caribbean, we have to look at zero hunger and malnutrition, because we have a malnutrition problem in the Caribbean. We have quite a bit of obesity, diabetes, a lot of lifestyle related diseases, and so our challenge will really focus on also addressing malnutrition. So we'll be looking at strengthening the school feeding programs, which is one of the pillars, and we spoke about that. We'll be looking at initiatives towards decreasing the food import bill. St. Lucia now imports about $350 million worth of food every year. And that, if we could at least replace some of that, that would really do well for our own economy. Good governance and management of poverty programs. We have realized that within the government institutions, many different ones, everybody has a little project or a little initiative that really looks at the poor or the indigent, but these are not really streamlined. We all don't know what each other is doing, and so sometimes you may have duplication, and this Zero Hunger Challenge will be looking at how we could all bring these things all together, which is why we have the Ministry of Social Transformation also as part of this project. And improvements in nutrition and health status of the population. And that's where Ministry of Health comes in very critically, because we have a problem with malnutrition. We have obesity in this country, we have diabetes, we have people eat very poorly in St. Lucia. And so we are going to be looking at initiatives to better educate persons and to change lifestyles of persons. So this is what we're looking at. But basically the Zero Hunger Challenge really wants to look at the most poor persons in your society. we would not be a socially responsible society if we ignore those around us who are underprivileged. And there are many people around us who are underprivileged. And so the Zero Hunger Challenge will be bringing those persons into focus. How can the government or private sector increase opportunities for them to earn a living, to be gainfully employed? Whatever period of time, whatever amount of money, it really contributes and goes a long way towards giving people a sense of fulfillment and being part of your society. So that's really what the Zero Hunger Challenge is about.
I think on the area of nutrition, there has to be a lot of education, because most of us eat and we really do not know what we are eating beyond the name of the food that we eat in. I don't think our culture has encouraged us to take note of the nutritional content of our food, how much sugar is in it, what is the effect of taking in that quantity of sugar in one dose, you know, calories and counting calories. If you count your calories, people think you're crazy, or that you're trying to diet or trying to lose weight. So I think there needs to be a lot more engagement and education on that matter. But we're due for a second commercial break. When we come back, we'll be bringing you into the discussion. So stay in touch. We'll be right back. Good night, and thank you for staying with us on In Touch. We have been discussing the school feeding program, the Zero Hunger Challenge. It's an opportunity now for you to call in to share your views. The telephone number will be placed on the screen right now. You can call us at 452-7347. My guest this evening is Ms. Sunita Daniel, and she's the Chief Agricultural Planning Officer in the Ministry of Agriculture. I note, Ms. Daniel, that there are other initiatives within the Ministry of Agriculture that will be geared towards the very same mission, in that our farmers are integrated into the program, that they are producing enough to supply our schools, enough to supply the local businesses as well. And something I saw recently that excited me so much was a collaboration between the Ministry of Agriculture and the business places, but the hotels, because there has been this constant nagging relationship between the hotels and the farmers. And I saw that the SLHTA and the Ministry of Agriculture came together and hosted a meeting to discuss possibilities and areas for improvement in that relationship. Tell us a little bit about the projections and what we are hoping to achieve. Do you think there would ever be the day when, you know, the farmers and the hotels would be so happy with each other that we would no longer have some of the complaints that we have been hearing?
It's actually something that we are looking forward to, that day, and we are working towards, actually. And so this symposium, which was held between the Ministry of Agriculture and the SLHTA, is actually a first positive step in that direction. And it was actually a very successful activity, and we'd like to thank the SLHTA, whose idea it really was to do it, and we've come on board with them to support that project. Farmers and hotels have had historically a very tense relationship, but that seems to be improving lately. And that symposium brought them together, and the farmers said to hoteliers what our frustrations are with you.
Payment is a big one.
Payment.
The length of time between supply and the payment. And the farmers, they have been complaining about that for so long. We have our first call on the line. We'll go to the phone lines right now. We've lost that caller. Continue to call in and be part of our discussion. But they have been complaining for so long about payments. And we understand that the large businesses, they operate on payment cycles. And so most times you do not have cash transactions. But the farmers also operate on a cycle in that their crops are seasonal, but there's a length of time that you need to invest so that you can plant and get to supply them again. Will we ever find a happy balance?
I think we're quite close to achieving that balance. We have brought in the SLDB with us, and so there's a factoring fund where the farmers have the option of getting paid within 1 day of selling to a hotel.
1 day?
One day.
This sounds like a fairy tale.
No, it's not, actually. Actually, it's not. So there is the factoring fund at the SLDB. Farmers can access their payment for what they've sold to the hotels within a day. It's not something that we think they'll use all the time, but definitely.
And probably it's not something that is available to all farmers.
It is actually available to farmers who operate with some specific hotels, but
Okay.
most of the hotels within the SLHTA. So they have that option of getting their payments quite quickly, one day. Who does that?
I'm sure the frustration is not one-sided because while our farmers may complain about the length of time it takes to pay, there may be some issues too on the hotelier's side in that supply. We may want tomatoes, but there's a shortage of tomatoes, so we have to import. Yet you're complaining when we are importing. How can we build a relationship so that each person know what the other person is looking for? But we'll take a call and then come back to that. Good night. Thank you for joining us on In Touch.
Good night.
Good night.
Orlando. Chef Orlando calling.
Oh, wow. Thank you for calling.
How you doing?
Good,
So,
thank
I
you.
mean, it's very good to hear your initiative. Well, one of the challenges you need to understand is that clearly we're trying to promote diversity between using local ingredients and promoting local ingredients more.
Yes.
And also the whole idea of solution needs to come to a point where they talk about agriculture and tourism as a unit as one point. So the biggest challenge I would say with the agriculture, they need to obviously connect with the hotels, but also with the small restaurants and encourage the restaurants to do more. Your biggest challenge with the hotels is because of the capacity and the amount of stuff they need on a daily basis, you cannot continually provide. So maybe your initiative could be to start with the small businesses, the small restaurants as a way forward, and start with that program and get them happily comfortable with your ingredients, and then move on to the hotels. What do you think about that idea?
I think that's
Yeah,
a wonderful
that's a
idea.
great
And
idea.
two, I don't know, are you still on air, Chef?
Yes, I'm there.
Yes, Sunita mentioned just a little while ago that the ministry has been exploring the possibilities of working with some of our local chefs so that we can have a more attractive package in terms of how we prepare the foods. Because one of the greatest difficulties now is that the food does not seem to be attractive to our young people, to our students. What can you bring to the table in terms of helping the cooks at our various schools so that they would be able to do more with the local foods?
Well, first of all, we look at our product as our cuisine. We will have a massive fun and games like last week and the last month of Junior Creole. We need to take Junior Creole to be all year round, and of course, but present it in a more presentable way, which is more attractive to the international audience. And more, shall we say, more. When we're talking about our people, we got to look at more healthy. The problem is that we can't be eating dasheen year round.
Yes.
So at the size we do, so we can present dasheen in a more presentable way. We can take green banana in a more presentable way. But in terms of using as a more nutritious value, you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
I think it comes down to education, realistically. We have some amazing ingredients here in the islands. As you know, I've been a big advocate of farm-to-table concept, and in doing so, I think when the ministries and also SLSGA are having these meetings, invite the chefs, invite the people who are cooking the food to these meetings, because as much as you may have the people who are sitting there with directions and ideas, we're the one cooking the food. So you need us on board to give you ways that you can present food, give you ways on what our challenges are dealing with farmers, and actually having the products at a consistent way. Right now you can go and buy breadfruit 24/7 for $2 or $3. Come later in the year, you can't find breadfruit.
True, which is one of the limitations. We just discussed that how seasonal it is. But I thank you so much for your contribution, and I hope that you would lend your support and your expertise to the Ministry of Agriculture so that we can have a more integrated approach to how we develop this program and how we prepare our foods.
Well, I would love Mr. Daniels to give me a call, because I would think, if you may want to put an idea forward, maybe an idea is to get the hotels to adopt a school.
Great.
As a way forward, because there in that link you have the schools, the hotels all on board, and then we start feeding the program, the school program that way. And so the hotels go into the schools, the chefs go and advise, you get the students talking about food, that way. Don't forget the small local restaurants like us. I would definitely love to adopt the school. If you call me and tell me, I would share the love with you.
Great. I'm excited about that. Thank you so much for calling.
Yeah, thank you, Sonia. Good luck, yeah, Sonia.
You're welcome.
Right.
Thank you. Wonderful.
That's
I
a
tell
good
you,
point.
I really love this, and I love this idea too. From this morning, we have been having these discussions, and I'm very sure that some of the contributors, because one of the points that was made by a contributor in SLAP, I think Dudley George was his name, that we need to get the chefs to pass on their skill, to train the cooks. And now we have one of our renowned chefs calling to say that he is willing, he's willing to contribute. And the idea of having the hotels adopt the school, I think that's a very good one too. Good night, thank you for joining us on In Touch.
Hi, good night.
Good night.
Yes, I'd like to make a contribution.
Sure, go ahead. Hello?
Hello?
Yes, you could go right ahead, sir.
Okay. Hi, good night, JJ. Good night, Ms. Daniel.
Good night.
Very interesting discussion. And I've heard the idea of inadequacy and glut being mentioned again and again. And I think one of the areas that I've not we looked at a linkage within that is where we use technology to enhance that problem or to address that problem.
I think, yeah, that's a very good point, because we can preserve through different means to ensure that we have it available tomorrow.
Yes. I'd just like to mention, JD.
Is this the extent of your contribution, caller?
No, I
go
was
ahead. Sure.
about to say we can use it can be a win-win for farmers, for the hotels,
The schools,
and for the country on a whole, because if we look at marrying the Sustainable Development Ministry or bringing them in where they can use, say, renewable technologies to tailor towards storage and all of that, then you can get people thinking, and you may even get funding for it.
Yes.
From a renewable standpoint.
Yes. Thank you so much for that, caller. Do we have any ongoing initiatives, or are we going that way? Processing and preserving food. I know it has been a challenge, and I know that so many ideas have been thrown at the Ministry of Agriculture, and we have had some attempts. Where are we right now?
We actually have the Farson processing plant where we do a limited amount of processing. So your viewers may actually have seen, have bought some yams or dasheen or breadfruit that has been vacuum packed. So we do that. We also do pulping of juices, and so even when mango is not in season, you can still get mango juice because we pulp and freeze those juices.
Do you think we're maximizing what we have available, or is there limited capacity at that facility?
There is limited capacity. I mean, we can always do a lot better than we're doing now, but definitely to kind of operate this kind of plant, you need a huge investment, and so that's one of the areas we're looking at. Where's the private sector in there? So
I think we got a suggestion from one of our callers that we should go to the sustainable. There's a lot of money there now. Good night. Thank you for calling.
Hi, good night, lady.
Hello.
Good night.
I must say this is a very, very interesting, not even interesting, very good initiative taken in both by the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Agriculture. I'm also one of those business people that also received a letter and was calling seriously, especially from the Beaufort area. I guess we did speak, to the relevant authorities. And as soon as the project is on its way, we're willing and we're backing it 100%. I think it's also good for our farmers. We've had our farmers, languishing. We're trying to get things to export. We shouldn't even be exporting. We should be using all of our produce right here in St. Lucia. I think that gives, every one of us, what should make us happy, because local is all we should go. Our kids should be interested in eating local. And, I don't have any more words to say, but good initiative, great things will happen. And I'm sure we'll all be happy, because if we eat local, spend local, we should be a very good and a happy nation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your contribution. And again, a lot of support from the private sector for this initiative, because they understand that we are investing in our own lives, really.
Yes,
if we get our children to eat right, from that level, if they get an appreciation for the local foods, then you would have adults who will be making more conscious choices in how they purchase. Now, this morning at the ceremony, I'm not so sure which one of the speakers, but he spoke to the price factor. And he said that, to be honest, it is an expensive program to run. And when we go to the supermarkets, we see it.
Yes.
We see that sometimes our local produce is more expensive than the imported produce. And if one is to make a decision solely based on price, which we are usually inclined to do, then we would go to the imported produce. But he spoke of the other benefits that we cannot quantify at that very point.
Right.
You engage in your farmers, you're talking about employment, you're talking about developing a habit so that people would gain this consciousness that this is St. Lucian. How will we fund this program? Because we're talking about sustainability, and the reality is that a garden cannot produce a meal. There are other inputs that would be needed to produce that meal. But before you respond to that, we lost that call, but you can continue to call in. How will we meet the cost of the other inputs? Because not every child would pay that dollar. We know that.
Yes. Jadia, what we have to understand is that the imported foods actually come from more industrialized countries, and they benefit from economies of scale that our small farmers cannot be realistically expected to meet. And so we should know that we may pay maybe 10 cents more for something.
Maybe more.
Maybe more.
Yes.
But let's say a few dollars more than an imported good. However, that's, you know what you're consuming. You know where it comes from. Do you know what you're eating now from the importer, where it's coming from? Do you know how long it's been in a freezer?
How it was
Do you know
handled?
how it was handled? Do you know that? But for this one, you know, what you eat in St. Lucia is St. Lucian. And so it also takes away the cost, the future cost of curing diseases. So you consume all of these processed foods now, but what is your cost in the future to address the health issues that you will get? And so I think $2 more is actually nothing compared to the cost that you would have to pay later on for bad health. And we all know that health is better than wealth, like they say.
I can tell you, we would have to have a lot more convincing and a lot of discussion, particularly for our young people, so that they can gain an appreciation for that. Because most of us are driven to make decisions based on our immediate needs. We have a call. Good night. Thank you for calling. We've lost that caller.
But
sorry about that caller,
the
but
point
you
you
can
were
continue
making about the dollar a day. There in St.
Yes.
Lucia, some children can't afford to pay $1 a day.
Very true.
And so what you have is the schools actually give these children a meal, and the dollar is too much, but they need to pay. And so it is an expensive program. The government currently contributes about $1 million a year to this program. That is still not enough for us.
I would gather that, because I don't see how the dollars adding up. It may add up in terms of providing certain things in the kitchen, but certainly not to $1 million. Good night. Thank you for joining us. Hello. Good night.
Yes, hello, good night, Lydia.
Yes, sir.
And good night to the lady.
Good night.
I just want to make a comment
Sure.
and to draw your attention to something else.
Sure.
I think the initiative by the Ministry of Agriculture, very good. But my concern is the sustainability of this program. It's important because if we can go along, or if we can get the nation to buy into this program, it's going to save us at least, I know, $6 million on chicken wings and other issues. And then our health will be improved. I believe your body will react to what you eat. So my concern is really for us to buy into it. Some years ago, I think around 82 or there about 81, there was a program.
81 is before I was born. You call that some years ago?
Yeah. Well, I want to bring you why I made the point is sustainability.
Yeah, sure.
Because the preaching at that time by the authorities at the time was, in your home garden, try to, apart from planting flowers, plant a little ground provision or something like that.
Yes.
And that idea was beaten down. I think if we had allowed, but we still have a chance, if we could have allowed that kind of mindset to develop, we would be able to feed ourselves a little better, and we would save. I want to draw your attention. I don't know if you're aware of it, but there's a program called Eat Fresh St. Lucia's Best by the Ministry of Agriculture with Philip Sidney. Every second and third Tuesday of the month, we repeat on Saturday night. I think that program tells us about how we can use our own provision, our own produce to sustain ourselves and do it in a way that we will not spoil. For example, and there was a solution here, Dr. David Williams from Harvard University. And I think we don't know how to cook, and I'm happy the chef they will come, because, for example, dashing in a natural form has carbohydrates, which is good. But when I understand, when we mix all the butter and the oil and the lard, that's what creates the problem. And I could see that happening just a few days ago.
You're talking about Juniqueo? Yes.
Maybe the culture has to change there. Maybe we got to know well the culture things change, because
we need the chefs. I can tell you that.
Yeah,
we need the chefs to teach us new ways to prepare our food, and ways that will be extracting the most nutritional value out of that food, because really you can prepare something in different forms, and at the end of the day it may not be as nutritious as you would sell it in its original form.
Yes, because just quickly to get off the line, some time ago I attended some tournament in Santo Domingo, and they prepare a dish, pure banana and other stuff. I really didn't know what it was, but when I told what they were doing, the banana, the shape and the presentation of it, it was out of this world. And I think these are things we have to learn and learn fast. We're not learning fast enough, because we keep on learning things for 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years. Then we're going back to it and do it all, just recycling. We need to learn things, sustain it, and move on.
Yes.
That's my main point to you today.
Thank you so much for your contribution. Again, we're speaking about sustainability. Habits. What we pass on to our children, what they learn and what they absorb and appreciate. The food that you eat must come from somewhere. What is a contribution that you can make? And I spoke to the backyard gardening. I noted that just recently we had the ministry presenting a bill to the House of Parliament to make backyard gardening a little bit more attractive, where you can get incentives. We are providing more incentives to the smaller farmers, so you may not be on a larger scale, but if, for example, you have 5 rabbits and so on, you can apply to the Ministry of Agriculture and get some new incentives. But what we are hearing from our callers is that there needs to be sustainability. We need to ensure that what we are investing up front to get this program running continues, and it would mean too that we would need strong leadership at all levels. At the school level, at the community level. Someone needs to run with the program.
Yes.
And how do you cater to for transition?
Very good point, because a committee now looks at the school feeding program, but this is really something that the Ministry of Education has authority over. And so we have looked at all those sustainability issues. And the good thing about a sustainable school feeding program is the word sustainable in there. And so we have plans for how to make it sustainable. We anticipate that after the end of this 3-year project, those schools will be able to continue on their own.
And hopefully we'll be bringing in new schools.
We'll be bringing in new schools.
Excellent.
And that's an important point, that new schools will be added onto this project as we go along.
Because we need to get other communities to benefit from it too. And I know too that even as we are listening, many persons are brainstorming as to how, what they can contribute, what can they do, and how schools that are not on the pilot program can bring in new and creative ideas to revamp their programs. Good night. Thank you for joining us on In Touch.
Hi, good evening. How are you?
Good, thank you.
I just want to mention or ask. I've heard the Minister of Agriculture speak about our food import bill and so on. And I think that this initiative by the school feeding program and so on can actually contribute to actually lowering our food income bills by some extent. So I just want to recommend, I think it's a great initiative. I think a caller before me mentioned that. And I just hope that it expands, and as you said earlier, that it will be by next year. I want to commend the partners. I want to commend the private sector. You mentioned the government of Brazil, and they have the best school feeding program in the world and so on. So that is something that actually gives it substance, and we have all of those partners coming on board. And I want to recommend the businesses, our local businesses in St. Lucia as well, and the government of St. Lucia. Great initiative. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that contribution. And again, yes, when we have the support from those who have done it before,
Exactly.
you can learn from their mistakes. You can
lessons.
pattern. You can. There are things that they would do that may not necessarily apply
For
to your local context, but the other islands around us, do we have similar programs currently ongoing, or are we ahead in terms of the changes that we're now implementing in our school feeding programs?
Actually, I was just speaking to the FAO, and they were saying that St. Lucia's model, the entire Caribbean is looking at, because in no other Caribbean do you have the private, in no other Caribbean island do you have the private sector on board. And they actually had a technical meeting on school feeding a couple of weeks ago, and they were actually mentioning that one of the ways to do it is to bring in the private sector, and St. Lucia has gone ahead and done that. And so people are looking at our project to see what are the lessons that are to be learned. So we are trying to learn from Brazil, and the rest of the Caribbean is trying to learn from what we are doing for their own.
There is a school of thought that young people do not really embrace agriculture. They do not like agriculture, that they see agriculture as the father's job and the grandfather's job and so on, and that we are becoming modern, that we are moving to a new era, a new way of doing things. The introduction of the gardens into the school, I know, would also introduce our younger ones to the concept of gardening, to a love for agriculture and so on. Do you see that kind of interest from our students, or do you think it would be a very difficult task to get these little ones to appreciate this is where my food comes from, and I should have a part to play in this as well?
It's not difficult at all. You should see the glee. You should see the enthusiasm of these children when they are in the school gardens. And the school garden is also used as a teaching tool. So you want to teach children multiplication. These are rows, these are columns. Let us count the rows and columns and so on. And you also use it for teaching them about plant propagation, which they do in science. Very recently, there were SBAs where grades 4 students.
I'm so not used to this SBAs in primary school thing. My daughter has gone through it, but I'm still trying to adjust because this is just not the system I was under when I went to school.
Right. So they had SBAs where they had to speak about plant propagation, and so they went to the Union Propagation Station. For students.
I'm still trying to get over it, but it's good that they've been introduced to it at an early age.
And so the school garden can be used to do those SBAs. And so the school garden is not only about food and eating, but it's also about social skills. So you socialize with other people, you learn conflict resolution. It can be used as a teaching tool for many different subject areas. So it's not only one area, but quite a few areas that the school gardens, and that's something we learned from Brazil, which we didn't know ourselves really how to do it, and we saw how well it operates in Brazil, and that's we have started replicating it in St. Lucia, and it's working excellently.
Just as we prepare to wrap up, there is one question I have to ask you, and it is not into the school feeding program and so on, but there's a program currently ongoing within the Ministry of Agriculture, which is a Youth in Agriculture program. It is a program that we have heard a lot about, and I remember the last time we had a discussion, someone was actually involved in the program, spoke so highly about this program. What really is this program, and what kind of support is available to young people under this program? And if there is anybody who's listening who has an interest in being under this program, are there still opportunities available? Okay,
it's called the Youth Agri-Entrepreneurial Project, and it actually gave us quite a few lessons itself, because everybody thinks the young people are not interested in agriculture. This is the biggest fallacy ever. A lot of young people in St. Lucia actually came to the ministry and said, I want to join this project. And we actually had to be rejecting people because they all couldn't be accommodated under the project, which was something we didn't want to do. And so that project is coming on stream. We know people have had to wait a little while, but we had to do things correctly, and we want to do it correctly the first time. And so it's taken a little time, but now a lot of it's quite on its way. For the first phase of the project, we have pretty much closed off. So we have already chosen the persons, they have gone through the training, they have their business plans, and it will be operated as a business. However, young people do have a chance to come into the second phase of that project. This first phase will be funded by the CDF. The second phase will be funded under the BAM projects. So there is opportunities for young people to come on board. They will be receiving basically getting a lot of what they need to start up. We know that young people don't have money and they don't have a lot of access to finance. And so this project will be giving them allowing them to access finance at the SLDB, but also putting infrastructure in place for them to start off their agricultural farms. And
land is a major issue. Would land be available too?
Land is available also. They will go into a listing agreement for government-owned lands, and so that is all happening now. We are also, the Prime Minister announced in the last budget, looking at a land bank for agriculture, and that's something the ministry is working really hard towards, and so more lands will be coming on the agricultural production very soon.
It's always a sad thing when we get to this point of the program. We are coming to a close. I want to thank you, Ms. Danielle, for being on the program tonight. A very exciting program. And again, I know that you would not forget, but I just need to stick the pin to make the point. Our chefs. I like good food.
Yes.
And I know
Everybody
what good
does.
food is. And I think it would serve us well if our children are introduced to good food at a very early age, because this is where they would get an appreciation for the local food. It will be attractive to them, and so if they are placed in a position where they need to choose between a local meal and, you know, a slice of pizza or something, that they would make the right choice. But just to give you an opportunity for your final comments on the school feeding program as we close.
Okay, I just want to say that we are all very excited to be working on this. I have a very special place in my heart for children and school feeding, because I was a teacher once, and so I have seen children who actually come to school and they're hungry, and I really am happy to be contributing this way. And the Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Education, you can sense this purpose, this unity within this whole committee, because nobody is getting paid any extra money to do this, and we stay back after work, we do a lot of work, a lot of commitment. So you can see that it's really something everybody wants to see be successful. I want to thank the private sector, and I want to also invite the private sector, all the members of the private sector, to please come in and contribute to this, because a child who is hungry today could also be your problem in the future. That would lead to delinquent behavior and so on. So we always say at the committee level, a hungry child is an angry child. And so we need to stem that. He's an angry man.
Yes. Call Chef Orlando. And of course, I like the idea of having a hotel adopt
We actually have a hotel who has put themselves up. Bay Gardens Hotel has actually suggested that they would like to come in on this project.
And we have a number of hotels in Sufra, and we have 2 schools in Sufra in that program. So perhaps the other schools can get that level of support. I thank you so much for joining us on In Touch tonight. A very interesting discussion as always. If you're listening and you have a contribution to make, it may not necessarily be a contribution in cash. We've heard, for example, that WIZO is providing the greenhouses. They're also providing irrigation materials. So if you have something to offer, whether it be your time, whether it be your talent, your expertise, or something that you have in your business, an idea that you want to share that you know would make this program a more successful program, feel free to call in the Ministry of Agriculture, call in and ask to speak to Ms. Danielle, or you will be guided to anyone who is part of that program, because this really is our business. It is our investment in our young ones to ensure that we are presenting healthier students, healthier people into our society. I thank you so much for joining us. We'll be back here next week, Monday, with another edition of In Touch. As always, do have a pleasant week and join me next week at 9 p.m.